a system of open spaces. It becomes even a figure that you can recognize. All right, so that's an application of the negative space approach in urban. Now, I would like to, how much time do we have? About 30 minutes. That's a little 30 minutes. So I would like to show two cities in Belgium that have gone through this modernism transformation and postmodernism response. One is Brussels and the other one is Louvain, New Leuven. So the first one is Brussels, that I guess you know quite well now. If I'm correct, you work in AVAT, the studio. Okay. Maybe, I guess also the architects, you also know a bit about Brussels. You have some projects there. So Brussels used to be a quite provincial town. Until the Second World War, it was one of the Flemish, Belgian town, a bit less than 1 million inhabitants. But then after World War, a number of very important transformations occurred that really lifted the state status of Brussels. There was, first of all, the railway connection from the North Station to the South Station. So this is called the North-South connection, which then led to the creation of the Central Station, great advantage, but the way it was done was really disastrous because they really broke a significant part of the urban family. So we'll talk about this. In 1958, there was a world exhibition that we are still proud of, although it's more than 50 years ago, like 60, more, 70. That also had made Brussels on the world map. And in the process, they upgraded the road system. So at that time, it was all about car access. So the whole road system, the ring road around Brussels, has been scaled up with tunnels, bridges, so it can be the most car accessible city in the world. And then a number of projects that would mainly private-led try to build on this wave. And I forgot to mention that also Brussels became the capital city of the European institution, which was called the Common Market at that time, was called the European Union. So it became suddenly a international capital. So these are some images just to give an idea of it was mainly synonymous with a wave of destruction or self-destruction. The North-South junction, which took almost 20 years to be finished. Very wide space, completely destroyed. And the way it was rebuilt then also was done in a very basic way, so covering the railway tracks and put just a layer of office spaces on it. One of the also famous projects was the North Station, which used to be on the square Rogier Plain. That used to be the North Station, and because of the new connection, the new station was moved here, and this became a new place for new development, and that was called the International Center, Rogier, and also known as the Martini Tower. And it was a completely private-led. You see, Bruno de Meuler wrote a whole book about it, and it was basically designed while it was being constructed. And so a huge amount of square meters, and they were not really sure what to do there, so people would come and invest. And so it was a sort of very big building, multifunctional, that unfortunately has been now demolished. As I said, it was the paradise for cars. This is a view from the great market, Grand Place in Brussels, which used to be literally a parking. And then also to increase the capacity of the road, you would have a viaduct in front of now, which is now it's a museum now, the Citroën garage. And this is what the central station used to look like, the train station. So in front you have just an empty triangle that resulted from this transformation and it turned into parking. So the city was completely transformed very heavily. And it was also the start, the late start of the planning instruments. So in 1962 we had our first urban planning law, and it was still very functional, functionalist, so different zones. And there was a call here, a plan to modernize Brussels. And it's all about traffic, parking, increasing the access, adding new roads. Unfortunately, the plan was never approved because otherwise it would have destroyed even further. But it's a good demonstration of the mood at that time, so prioritizing modernist architecture and car traffic. There were a few neighborhoods were transformed in this idea. That's in the Marole, which is in the city center, one of the popular neighborhoods. So you see before after, so it was from a traditional housing block structure to these high-rise buildings. That also took a while to. It's very big contrast, and it's a kind of break and rupture in the urban fabric. And then one of the most impressive projects was the World Trade Center. So you recognize here the railway tracks coming from the north, entering the city. So that would be the new station, and the idea was to graft a new international World Trade Center next to it, with office spaces. It was completely private-led by this guy called Charles de Paul, a self-made man who quit school when he was 12, and then at the end he was quite successful in his business. And then he was also a good friend of the mayor, so that helped. And so he was obsessed with the US. So there's a very nice portrait you can test it with that. So in his office you will have the portrait of all American presidents. And it was all about the US, the World Trade Center. And he even mentions that in New York they have towers of 400 meters, and he says, but here we have 4 towers of 100 meters, so it's more or less the same. So you see how 4 towers. So it was a very ambitious project, and the idea was to literally connect to the platforms of the station and give direct access to the office space. It's very much like the vertical city. We saw this vision, this utopian by Hilbert Sanger. And it was quite elaborate. You see the project, very ambitious. And at some point, it didn't work that well because there were not so many clients. So the project was abandoned halfway. But still, a few pictures that show the promising future that this project would have brought. But the only detail I forgot to mention, and probably the developer had a bit underestimated, is that all this new development would take place in an existing neighborhood. So the condition to make this new World Trade Center was to erase more than thousands of houses and households in one of the most popular neighborhoods in Brussels, so the North, like the North District. So this became, it was called also Project Manhattan, in reference to New York. And you see here how the towers would replace the existing neighborhood. So it's, since most of the people living there were not owning the house, they were renting it, and for cheap price, it was a popular neighborhood. They had very limited means to resist, to counter the process. So it was a vast, massive destruction process. You see here the red lines, and this up will disappear. And then people lived in it looks like a post-war landscape, but it was only self-organized. And the main problem is that the project went through crisis, economic crisis in 1973. We had the first oil crisis, and also there were not enough clients. So the situation was more or less like this for several decades. So you see the platform was made, but it was not achieved, so it would not connect to the station. So you have the first 10 meters are like a blind wall facade, and it remained like a half waistband for several details. So that's again, this process, I forgot to mention the title, it's called Brusselization. So it's a term that was proposed to describe this tendency to self-destroy the city, mainly private developers who want to make profit. And I guess the most emblematic example of the Brusselization is the destruction of the People's House by Victor Hofstad, who's the most famous Art Nouveau architect in Belgium, by a very banal, stupid office building, tower. And there was no resistance. There was very little awareness of the value of this. Very little resistance. One of the reasons is that Brussels is very fragmented between different municipalities, so there was a lack of coordination. It has improved a little now, but so yeah, very significant heritage has disappeared in this process. And then you have the intrusion of elements that are completely out of scale. So in reaction to that, you have first of all, the inhabitants started to protest and try to resist. Millions for new developments and nothing for us being displaced. And in the more popular part of the country, also don't touch to the city center. So there was a growing resistance and a number of events, posters, demonstrations. Like, no thanks for this new development. And then a number also of architects and urbanists started to take on this process of resisting and preserving and maybe even rebuilding the city. And they were organized under the name of ARO, so the Atelier de Recherche et d'Action Nouvelle, so research and urban research and action workshop. So it's a citizen collective with architects that would really take the viewpoint of the inhabitants. And you see from these publications, it's about taking ownership of the city, reconstructing it, city through the eyes of its inhabitants. Also an interest for the typo-morphological analysis of the city. And that was literally in line with what we talked about, this postmodern response to modernism. And that's illustrated in a publication that was even more sort of manifesto, the Declaration of Brussels, because they thought that Brussels was the best place to illustrate the devastation of modern developments in an existing city. So you see here how it's positioning the manifesto. Like you would have the Charte de la Terre, so the Siam Le Corbusier functionalist project with separate functions that would be all distant from each other. That means you have to commute. While in the proposal of the more traditional city, it should be a complex neighborhood with all the functions integrated. The different components here in the modernist lexicon, it's the road, the block, and the zone. They say we should speak of the street, the square, and the neighborhood. So yeah, you see, it's by contrast taking position to defend the values and interests of, but it's also very conservative. Their manifesto says that every new intervention must recreate what the city has always been, that is a neighborhood that includes all the different functions. So clear response to the modernist transformation and destruction that had affected Brussels. So from the 70s, 80s, 90s, this was the main approach in Brussels to reconstruct, try to reinterpret what a Brussels urban fabric could be like in architecture, sometimes with a bit of bigger scale to make a sort of intermediate scale between the 19th century houses and the big high-rise towers. So this is a project that was realized. It's Antwerp, Steenweg, leading to the north station. And then along the north-south railway track, you have this Pacheco Boulevard, which is oversized. So they also made, I think there's a book, yeah. So they made a series of counter projects. So the approach was, if a developer wanted to make a new office building, they would propose something different and then go to the mayor and say, maybe we could do it differently in a more integrated way, and more traditional. So there are tons of examples of proposed projects. Some were realized, and some not. And this is interesting. This is the big triangle in front of the central station that you saw. The picture was the big west line here. So this is now completely built up, so we don't see it anymore. But so there was it was like an open scars of the north-south connection with the parking and gasoline. And their proposal was very to reconstruct the tissue, to reconnect streets, to create frontage, a bit like the city as it has always been. And in fact, this project was more or less realized in that way. Although there were other interesting projects by Xavier Dechiater and Newton since Stefan Glenn made another project I will show in another lecture. And basically, this is how it looks like now. So all of this pretending to be old Brussels buildings are quite recent, threading the block. But I don't think it's very successful. The square behind is really not working well. And then also, if you come out of the station, it's very difficult to go to the center. But that's it. That's a good example of this apple, so the postmodern response to the Brusselization. Ready for another one? I will maybe talk about this. So Louvain-la-Neuve. Who has been to Louvain-la-Neuve? If you look at the Belgian guys, the one and only. So it's really worth a visit. It's also interesting, since you studied Leuven, to know a bit about the history behind. So this is how it looked like when it was under construction. It somehow still looks a bit like this. We'll understand what led to this concept. So first thing was from the 60s, there was, you remember all these social movements for more autonomy, independence, and that included then the Flemish community here, asking for the French part. So Leuven was at that time still had the two French and Dutch-speaking institutions cohabiting, but they were separate. So you have different faculties, but in the same city. And at some point, the Walloons were not welcome anymore, so one go home. And so yeah, it went at some point also be violent. It's interesting to understand it's not only a language issue, it was also a political and social thing. That what they would say is that the French-speaking students in Leuven were mainly from the bourgeoisie, from the high upper class, and their point was said, instead of having a university here in a Flemish town, you should better provide higher education where it's needed in Wallonia. For instance, in all the former coal mining and industrial zones where there's a need for to educate the new generation of people living there. So it was not only about get out, it was also maybe the French university should be located in a place that would be more useful. But it didn't work because in the coal mining industrial area it was very socialist. So the idea of having a Catholic university coming was inconceivable from both sides. So what then was selected is a very large piece of land that was in fact owned by one guy who lived in Portugal. So it was one of the rare one coherent 900-hectare site, not too far from a future highway. And this is the professor who became the general administrator to make this new city happen. So they bought the 900 hectares, so the university owns the land. And you see how it looked like. It was really very open, only a few farms. And the guy who's called Michel Watrin, he was really an enlightened director. So he went to all existing campuses around the world. He talked to all the best architects and urbanists to really make a good project. And at the end, he selected Victor Brun. So you remember him, he's the one who invented the shopping mall. And the reason why he thought it would be a good choice is because he was very a supporter of mixed-use development. At the time when it was still the modernist period, with separate function, he thought a good city, because Louvain-la-Neuve wanted to be a good mixed city, should be mixed use. So he got the commission in 1967, in fact before the city, I mean the French university left, and he made a proposal which is visible in the model. And it was more a program of how to organize faculties, residential areas. And there was a sort of misunderstanding when in Belgium they received the model. They thought that that was literally the physical idea of how the city should look like. While in Victor Brun's view, it was more a conceptual model to be fine-tuned, of course. So people were really reluctant, thought this is too abstract, it's like Legoland, we don't want to live in this. So Watrin hired another group of architects who were more traditionalist, more culturalist. So this, based on the scheme of Victor Brun, it's the idea of how do you organize the different faculties. So they made this sociogram, so asking the faculty of engineering, do you want to work with the physicians? And then so they organized the program like in terms of disciplines and who wants to work with who. And then in terms of neighborhood and center, it's like the 4 leaves clover with in the center the station and the main urban functions. There was also the idea proposed by Grun. This is a valley to have there the train, a new railway, and to cover it with a platform, a bit like the new towns in Stockholm. So some of the ideas of Victor Grun were kept, but not the architecture, let's say. So this is where, Michel Watrin, so the commissioner, hired a team made out of 3 very good experts. One you probably know is Raymond Lemaire, who was an art historian, who the program here is called Raymond Lemaire. So those who study heritage here in Leuven are working at the Raymond Lemaire Institute. So he's an art historian, you have an architect, and an economist. And you see from the pictures here that they were very much postmodern. Like, for instance, here the idea that if you have high isolated building, people will feel lonely. While if you make with the same density more a collection of mid-rise buildings, there will be a greater sense of collectiveness and interaction. Also, great attention to how the public space should be providing this townscape, so having lots of diversity, accidents, and to be intriguing. And the city center itself was literally inspired by existing city centers like Leuven or Liège were taken as examples. And another very interesting discussion when you look at the scheme was originally to have before these having each a faculty. You would have the engineers, the social science here, the economist, and the physical education. And then it's one professor who said, no, we should mix or give the possibility for different disciplines to interact, otherwise they will become too isolated. So this led to, you see above, the idea of organize the whole city along a main street that goes from east to west. And then you have indeed the faculties, like engineers, exact science are there, social science are in the city center, in economist, and then you have the physical education. So that when you study there, that was my case, you are almost sure that you will see everybody in the street at lunchtime, which can be nice, but also a problem if you cross a professor and you didn't go to the lecture, you have to hide. So in terms of interaction, it's really working well. And then in terms of spatial organization, they literally took inspiration from Firenze, so Florence in Italy, how a street can also be more a sequence of moments with squares. So that's in Firenze, and this is how they imagined Louvain-la-Neuve with also a series of narrow street and then it's wide. So it was very much structuralist, very much postmodernist in the sense that we can learn from older urban fabrics and import some of the good principles. There was in fact, one of the few elements that still remain are the former farms. So each of these 4 neighborhoods are organized around an existing farm. And these are where you have the artistic activities and education programs. So that's Louvain-la-Neuve, and then the process it was very urgent. You had thousands of French students moving in. So the design was almost at the same time as the construction. And the technique they proposed was to work with viewing or atmospheres, I think that's the term, to sketch different atmospheres and then define the design together with the future users. So the professors, the students, the future residents would react to these sketches, and the design of the plan would be really trying to implement what was decided. So it's a sort of a trial and error, very much visually based type of approach. So in fact, the architects were mainly from Lacan, the Brussels school. That was the only French-speaking school of urbanism at that time. You see here then the new project. That's Raymond Lemaire, the professor who's presenting it to the king. And you will probably also see the connection between the Haute Bretagne, the Great Béguinage in Leuven, which Raymond Lemaire just restored. So he spent several years restoring this fantastic village in the city, in the center of Leuven. And this is how Louvain-la-Neuve looks like. So you see the great inspiration in terms of architecture, materials, shape, it was the idea, okay, we make a new Leuven, but we are still Louvain University, so we should have an environment that reminds us of Leuven. So it's a sort of copy, but of course different because it's more contemporary, more on the platform, but the sort of expression is very comparable. So that's some pictures of when it was under construction. And it's one of the few new towns, but it's the newest town in Belgium, and it's quite successful in comparison to many others, because it had the first layer of public investment for the university, but then now you have many private developments coming for you. There's a new commercial center, many new housing, many old people love to go there because it's car-free. You have all possible cultural facilities. And then they can sometimes see their grandchildren studying. So it became a heaven for Florida for older people, retired people. And then if you go there, you will, as architects, you'll see there are some of the best architects were also involved. The station was originally should have been designed by Louis Kahn, but he was too old and sick. So he sent a student of his, a French architect, who became then the professor at the university. But it's very much Louis Kahn style. And that's also a fascinating building. What used to be the library is now the museum. So it's a whole public space that is all organized. And the nice thing is that it's really expressing the idea of being on the platform. So the structure is very expressive, and the whole building is organized around. So it's really worth a visit. It's a good example of postmodernism. That's it. Do you have any questions for now? Okay, so we see each other next week. look at the consequences